Welcome to Midnight Mass Horror, where every shadow hides a story. Stay with us if you dare. I was in a small town for a work trip and checked into a very old hotel. One of those places that looks historic but feels like it's hiding something. They gave me room 303. The lady at the reception looked uncomfortable when she gave me the key, but I was too tired to care. When I entered the room, it felt ice cold, way colder than the hallway. I adjusted the thermostat, but nothing changed. The room felt wrong. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? That's how it felt the whole time. The walls had water stains that looked like they'd been there for years, and in the corner, an old armchair faced the bed. I tried to ignore it all and laid down to sleep. At around 2:33 a.m., I woke up to the sound of water dripping, but when I turned on the light to check, everything was dry. As I lay back down, that's when I saw her. A woman sitting in the chair, her head tilted down, her long black hair covering her face. My heart was pounding. I couldn't move. It felt like if I looked away, she would come closer. Suddenly, she lifted her head slightly, and I saw her eyes, completely black. And then, as if she noticed me noticing her, she slowly stood up. I bolted upright and turned on every light in the room. But when the lights came on, she was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, when I told the front desk, the lady just stared at me, her face pale. She whispered, "You saw her, didn't you?" When I asked what she meant, she said, "Room 303 was where a woman had been murdered by her husband years ago. Guests who stay there either check out early or sometimes don't check out at all." I checked out that morning. As I was leaving, the woman at the desk told me something I'll never forget. She said, "You're lucky. She usually sits closer." I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't turned on the lights in time, and I never planned to find out. If that gave you chills, imagine a room where guests check in but never leave. Subscribe for more haunted hotel horrors. The next story might be even darker. It was a business trip. I had checked into a high-end hotel, one of those with sleek, modern rooms and huge mirrors everywhere. I was in room 512. The moment I stepped in, I felt an odd chill. At first, I thought it was the AC, but even after turning it off, the room felt cold. The weirdest thing was the mirror right in front of the bed, floor to ceiling. As I was unpacking, I glanced at it, and for a moment I thought I saw someone standing behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there. I laughed it off, thinking it was just the stress of travel. That night, as I was trying to sleep, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Every time I opened my eyes, the room was empty. But when I looked in the mirror, there was a man, tall, pale, with sunken eyes, standing right behind me. I turned around, nothing. But every time I looked at the mirror, he was there, a little closer. At one point, I blinked, and he was standing right next to my bed, staring down at me through the reflection. I didn't sleep at all. I turned on all the lights and stayed awake, watching that mirror. As dawn approached, the figure slowly faded away. I went down to the front desk, looking like I had seen a ghost. The woman at the counter asked if I was okay, and I told her what happened. She looked at me, her face pale, and said, "You saw him, didn't you? You're not the first." She told me that years ago, a man had taken his own life in that room, and guests often reported seeing him in the mirror, always getting closer through the night. Before I left, I went back to grab my suitcase. When I glanced one last time at the mirror, I nearly screamed. There on the fogged glass was a handprint from the inside. I never stayed in a room with a mirror like that again. I was traveling cross-country and decided to stop for the night at a cheap motel off the highway. The place looked run down, but I was too exhausted to care. They gave me the last room on the left at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. As soon as I walked in, I felt like I had stepped into a freezer. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of something rotten. But what choice did I have? I tossed my bag on the bed and tried to settle in. That's when I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. Thinking nothing of it, I went over to close it, and as I did, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, like someone speaking right into my ear. I froze, heart pounding, but convinced myself it was my imagination. I turned on the TV for background noise and laid down. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of scratching, coming from inside the closet. I stared at it, my whole body tense. Then slowly, the closet door creaked open, even though I knew I had closed it earlier. And there in the darkness, I saw two glowing eyes staring back at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stepped forward, pale and thin, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and then it simply vanished right before my eyes. I jumped up, turned on every light, and sat in a corner of the room, staring at that closet till dawn. When the sun finally rose, I packed up my things ready to bolt out of there. But as I reached for my bag, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A long scratch like a claw mark running across my suitcase. I knew then it hadn't been a dream. Something had been in that room with me. When I went to the front desk to check out, I asked if anyone else had reported strange things in that room. The old man behind the counter looked at me and said, "You got room 7, didn't you?" "Yeah, you're not the first one to leave before your stay was over." He then muttered under his breath, "Some folks never left at all." I got in my car and never looked back. I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed another night. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway. The hotel was one of those fancy, old restored places with antique furniture and long hallways. My room was beautiful, but from the moment I walked in, something felt off. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. The first night, I ordered room service. About an hour later, there was a knock at the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. On the floor, though, was the tray of food. I thought maybe the staff had left it and knocked, but when I looked around, the hallway was completely empty. I shrugged it off and brought the food inside. As I sat down to eat, I heard it, a knock on the bathroom door inside the room. I hadn't noticed it before, but there was a small locked door in the bathroom, like a storage closet. I stared at it, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Later that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard whispering. It was faint, but it was coming from that locked door. I pressed my ear against it and could hear what sounded like a woman crying. I called the front desk, but when they sent someone up to check, they couldn't open the door. It was sealed shut. The next night I tried to ignore it all, but at exactly midnight, there was a knock at my door again. When I opened it, no one. But this time, there was no tray, just a single rose lying on the ground. I was officially freaked out. I decided to pack and leave, but as I was stuffing my things into my bag, I heard the bathroom door creak open behind me. When I turned around, the door to the storage closet was wide open now, though the maintenance guy had said it was sealed. Inside in the dark stood a woman, pale as a sheet, wearing what looked like an old hotel-maid uniform. She stared at me with hollow, empty eyes and then whispered, "Don't leave me here." I ran out of that room so fast I left half my stuff behind. At the front desk, I told them everything. The manager, an older woman, looked tired like she had heard this all before. She said years ago, a maid had been murdered by a guest in that very room, and sometimes she still does her rounds. Some people say she brings food, others say she just wants someone to hear her. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed, but every time I think about that weekend, I remember her eyes, those empty, hopeless eyes, and that voice, asking not to be left alone. I was attending a conference and checked into a hotel that seemed nice enough, but something about my room felt wrong from the start. There was a huge painting on the wall facing the bed, an old man sitting in a chair, just staring. His eyes seemed to follow me no matter where I moved in the room. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like I was being watched the entire time. That night, I made sure to cover the painting with a towel before going to bed. I turned off the lights and tried to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing, like someone was standing right over me. The room was pitch dark, but I could feel that I wasn't alone. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, and as soon as I did, I saw it. The towel had fallen off the painting, and now the man in the picture was smiling. I swear when I first came in, his expression was serious, even sad, but now his lips were curled in a cold, thin smile, and his eyes looked even more focused, directly at me. I jumped up, turned on every light, and stared at the painting. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if my mind was playing tricks on me or if something was really wrong. I called the front desk and demanded to be moved to another room. The staff member on duty was silent for a moment and then said, "Sir, you're in room 214, right?" I said yes. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the first person to ask to be moved from that room. It's that painting, isn't it?" He went on to explain that every few months they get complaints from guests about that same painting, how it seems alive, how it watches them while they sleep. The next morning, when I was checking out, I asked about the history of the room. The manager looked uneasy and told me that years ago, the man in that painting was the original owner of the hotel. He had died in that room, sitting in that same chair. They had left the painting as a tribute, but ever since, guests had been reporting strange things, cold spots, whispers, and that same feeling of being watched. As I walked out of the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I haven't stayed in a room with a painting since,